Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the regular session of the Schertz Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, April 12th, 2017. We'll call the meeting to order. First item on our agenda is hearing of residents. We had no one sign up on the sheet at the door, but if you now have second thoughts, we'd be glad to hear from you. All right, seeing no one, we'll move on to item 3, which is our consent agenda. We have 2 items on consent. 3A is minutes for the March 22nd meeting. 3B is PC 2017-013. And let me read that caption first. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a final plat for Lot 1 of the Kutza subdivision, approximately 13-acre tract of land located at 11634 Ware Seguin Road, City of Schertz, Bexar County. Anyone wish to consider these separately? All right. So again, seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion on consent.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I second.
We have a motion from Mr. Dalla, second from Mr. Glumbick to approve the consent agenda. Call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Consent agenda is approved as presented. Item 4 is workshops and discussions. We have 2 tonight. Both are public hearings. So we will hear from the staff, conduct the public hearing, close it, and discuss from the dais. So the first one, 4A, is a public hearing, presentation, and discussion regarding the Pavement Condition Index, PCI.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
My name is Cecilia Palomo, and I work in the engineering department here for the city. And so I was told that you guys requested a presentation on the PCI, and we're actually given the report last Friday. So I hope everybody read it because it's exciting stuff. So the PowerPoint reflects a little bit on the background of why the city decided to move forward with the study and how we're utilizing the study. And so the study was performed using a program called Micropaver, and the city already owned the software. We just weren't utilizing it the way we should have been, so we hired a firm who their background, their expertise is in pavement management. And so the study was finished last November. Let me go to the next slide. And so some of the things that Paver allowed us to ask ourselves or to prioritize is being able to manage the city's roadway network infrastructure, being able to keep track of our center line miles, also to update our work histories in the present and moving forward with any future work histories. And the program itself actually rates the quality of the roadway network for the city. So a particular road could be ranked, for example, 20 or 100, 100 being the best. It also allows us to prioritize which roads need to be addressed as far as maintenance or reconstruction, and it helps us to budget our money appropriately for a specific job or a specific road. So here, the program itself is called Paver 7. It's widely used worldwide, not just in the United States. It's very inexpensive. It only costs about $1,500. And with the study, 2 city staff were trained, myself and another individual from Public Works. So we continuously use the software, and whenever we accept new subdivisions with roads or we need to evaluate a road, he and we go out in the field and we use the program. So we update the database ourselves. So here are some of the questions that from someone who doesn't know the program, what the program helps us do. It helps us to keep track of our centerline miles. It helps us to identify the quality, the condition of the road, how fast it's deteriorating. It helps us to prioritize what roads in the city need to be crack seals, slurry seal, the reconstruction, the cost. It also helps us to allocate our funds appropriately. And the program itself was designed by the Army Corps back in the 50s. And so the program, they're at 7.0, whereas when it was first designed, it was just called micropaver. There's a little background on roads and why they deteriorate and what Public Works and Engineering looks at. We look at things like traffic volume, the elements, weathering, drainage, different types of loads like static loads, heavy truck traffic, basic vehicle traffic, also the age of the pavement. And so a little bit of that about that PCI number, the pavement conditioning index that the software spits out. So when you go and inspect a road, we inspect it in 100-foot sections. So every 100-foot section will have a different number to it. But let's say Schertz Parkway, there's lots of sections on it. It's about 3 miles long. And so it averages all the distresses and it gives you a final output. And so that output is from anywhere from 0 to 100. And so the distresses that it uses can be anything from a crack to a pothole to a repair to a weathering caused by drainage. So it takes all of those distresses into account, and then it spits out a number for that road. And it tells you, what severity or how good the road is. So looking at the PCI numbers, a road that is relatively new should be ranked between 85 to 100. So the picture itself shows a new subdivision road. And so at most, a new subdivision road would only need a crack seal because cracks happen from the elements, from the heat, from the cold, from the expansion of the road. So that's where crack seals come in. And then from 75 to 89, you're starting to see distresses from vehicular traffic and weathering. And so if you don't perform preventative maintenance, then it will go to the next stage. And so that stage could be, you'll start seeing cracks, and then once water gets in there, then it could destroy the base of the road, and then that's when you're talking reconstruction. So here you see what we call an alligator crack. And what happened was cracks started to form in the road, and then water started to seep in. And so once water starts to seep in, and then with the heating and the cooling of the earth, the asphalt expands, and then you start getting severe cracks. And then from severe cracks comes a pothole. So, but the program itself helps us to identify what streets are, say, ranked 75, and we can go out there and catch a crack and crack seal it, and help to the longevity of the road overall. So if you had a chance to read the report, one of the exhibits is this map. And so this map identifies roads that are in need of reconstruction in red or pink, and then roads that are in blue or yellow just need preventative maintenance. And then here, if you look on the left side of the exhibit, the numbers from 0 to 100 on the left side there are the PCI numbers. So roads that are ranked from about 75 or 85 and up will get a crack seal preventative maintenance measure, which is fairly inexpensive. And so as we all know, preventative maintenance just, is something that helps with the longevity of anything, whether it's your car, your house, it's the same for a road. So if we do preventative maintenance, we keep our costs low, whereas if we don't do preventative maintenance or do other rehabilitation practices, the condition of the road will become worse, and so the cost of the city will become worse. So that's where the software comes into play, and it helps us to decide what we need to do and how we need to spend our time and our manpower efficiently as well as our budget. If you look at the top right, where it talks about the different percentages of roads, quality of roads that the city has, in the blue is from 90 to 100. 37% of the city's roads are in pretty good condition. Well, actually, 37 and 44, I would say, are in excellent condition. So overall, the city has a lot of really good roads. So part of that is not just that we do a pretty good job of maintaining our roads, but also we have a lot of new growth, new subdivisions coming in. The city accepts new subdivisions. So we have a lot of new growth, so we need to be able to prioritize our time and do preventative maintenance and allocate our money for any other roads that need to be reconstructed. If you look at the top right, the 10 and 8 and 1% are roads that need severe reconstruction or other type of mill and overlay practices. So, but overall, if you take a look, the city of Schertz has a lot of good roads. And so talking to and working with the design firm, and this is what they do, it's part of what their firm does. So they finished a study for Leon Valley, for Windcrest, and Universal City recently, and compared to those cities, we have a lot better quality roads than those cities. So it's really important to utilize the program, the study, and move forward with preventative maintenance procedures and move forward for CIP programs and reconstruct roads appropriately. Or just a little bit of the background, the program will be helping us to decide how to allocate our funds appropriately, and it'll be a subjective, it'll be a, not a subjective, I'm sorry, can somebody help me with that? I'm totally confused now. What's objective? Thank you very much. I knew that's what it was. So this program will help us not to personally decide where to spend our money, but it'll help us to do it objectively. If you had a chance to read the report, they also gave us a recommended budget for the next 3 years using the program and the recommendations for reconstruction, including crack seal program and then slurry seal programs. And then the 4th year, we would redo the study and see how the city is doing after implementing those programs and doing reconstruction program, CIP programs here for the city. And then there's the budget itself overall, not just a small snapshot. If you look at the 4th row, it's kind of a peach or a brown color. Those are the slurry roads recommended to have slurry seal. And the Public Works Department is actually going to be getting bids to do those slurry seals on those particular roads this year. And then also the purple, the very bottom, they also started us off with a crack seal program, and the city started that in the 3rd week of November of last year after the study was performed. So we actually started the crack seal program. Here's just a small example of the first week's crack seal that was done last November. And so the Public Works Department had the equipment, and the way we've been utilizing this equipment is just to go out and do crack seals as needed, whereas now we're doing it every 3rd week of the month. And so in the Riata subdivision, they went out and did crack seal out there for 3 days. And so the contractor price on the right is what was in the study, that if we hired a contractor to go out and do the same type of work, it would have cost the city $18,000. But being that the city, we already had the equipment, we had 3 guys go out there for 3 days, and they performed the crack seal in the Riata subdivision streets, and it cost the city, this is just manpower and materials for the crack seal, so it was $1,600. And please keep in mind that that doesn't include the actual crack sealing equipment. We already own that equipment. We purchased it 2008, 2009 budget. And it also doesn't include the heavy truck needed to pull the crack sealing equipment. So we started that program. It's been successful. And I think if we maintain that program in the long run, it'll help to help preserve our road network. So just a little overview of what's happened since since the study was performed. So the City Council also reviewed the study, and I did this somewhat of the same presentation to them in January. And as a result, last night at the City Council meeting, they approved the C of O to move forward with some of the roads that were identified to be budgeted in the first year. So the engineering department is going to get with the on-call design firms and have them give us a proposal for design for the reconstructed roads for the first year's budget. And then, of course, Public Works is still doing their crack seal program every third week of the month, and that should happen without end. It's going to be a preventative maintenance program. Any questions or?
Why don't we wait and address questions until after the public hearing?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a public hearing, so we'll open at 6:17 for anyone who wishes to comment. All right, seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing, 6:18. And commissioners, we'll open for discussion, questions, concerns.
I guess, well, one question comes up is, where is Schertz Parkway fit in on this schedule?
Well, Schertz Parkway is a separate animal. It was something that was already discussed before or during the study and discussed before the study. So right now, as far as Schertz Parkway goes, there has already been a design firm contracted to do the design. They're about 60% of the way through. So that's completely separate. That was already something that we already knew there was a problem with that portion of the road. So that's why it's not part of the budget that you saw in the spreadsheet.
And so with that, just to touch base on the funding, the proposal is, or the plan is to use $800,000 that are remaining from, I think, the 2009 road bond. And then last night, with the notice of issuance that council approved, there was another $700,000 that we anticipate coming out of that $5.6 million for Schertz Parkway. So we think the cost is going to be about $1.5 million. And so with this bond issuance, we'll have the other almost half of that. So generally, I'd say funds are available. As Cecilia said, design is underway. I mentioned to council too, in addition to the design, including the road, it kind of held them up. They took a step back. We've included the hike and bike trail on this side of Schertz Parkway. If you know, it's experiencing on that side some of the same failures. And then additionally to look at designing a right turn lane for Live Oak at Schertz Parkway. So we'll get a design of all of those. I may not have enough money to do the hike and bike trail and or the sidewalk with the road, but it made sense if we're looking at it to look at all of that at one time. And again, once we kind of put it out to bid, we may do it as an ad alternate for those two components, see if we can afford it, and then decide how we want to go there. So just as a bit more to supplement what Cecilia said.
So when those crews go out for the crack sealing, how much can they typically get done in a day? Just,
Right now, they're averaging about 3 miles every 2 days.
So, and I guess at some point as we add more streets, then we'll have to either add additional crew or dedicate more time to that?
I really can't answer that because there's so much going on with our, the city growth, traffic volumes, and, even if we had the manpower to do that, I think in the long run there's so much more to do that it would be a never-ending cycle as it is. So if we were to add crews, that would be something that we would have to look at. Being that it's a new program and just doing it on the third week of every month, right now we're seeing how that's working, and we may be doing it enough to where we won't need another crew or need more manpower. So it's so early on that we've got to look at that. We actually had a discussion about that the other day, but it's so early on that we really need to see how it's working before we make those decisions, I think.
I guess one final question. What's the life expectancy of that piece of equipment?
Well, I've been told 5 years, but that piece of equipment is going on 10 years. Now, we haven't used it that often, you know. We only use it when we need to, when something comes up, when we did a patch. So now that we're using it consistently, you know, that might change.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Could you clarify the difference between a crack seal and a slurry? I think I have an idea, but
Okay, so a crack seal is when, I wish I had some pictures, but it's when you see a crew with a wand, and out of that wand comes a binder, a black petroleum binder. And so one person is driving the equipment with a big container that has this seal in it. And so one guy is covering the crack, and there's another person behind him spreading that crack with like a spatula. And so they continuously do that, like they don't stop until it's break time. So, yeah. And while they can do a whole residential road all at once, whereas a collector road, they can only do one side and then they have to come back. Yeah, and so a slurry seal is when in order to prepare a road for a slurry seal, they have to clean it, do crack seal, and then a big like a tank equipment with sprayers on the back of it comes behind it, and it sprays an asphalt emulsion, and it makes the road look brand new, but it's more of a preventative maintenance. It gives it a brand new look. Yeah, so it's essentially, you could almost say it's like a crack seal, but throughout the whole road. Yeah, and the same thing goes for that. They do one side of it unless it's residential, and then they come back and they do the other side.
do we have a slurry machine?
We do not.
No.
We do not.
This report says that the street department has a budget of $125,000 for maintenance. That doesn't seem like a whole lot to me. What's your opinion?
It's not a whole lot. You can look at our sister cities, and you know they could have 2 or 3 times that much.
So you said earlier that preventive maintenance is a key to keeping our costs down and keeping our streets in good shape. It doesn't sound like we're doing that. Mr.
You want to
Chair.
answer that, Brian? Or? Well, I think that part of Schertz, our staff, part of our jobs is with this whole new growth that we're getting. That is really, you can't compare it to any other state. Texas is growing, you know. We've got millions of people that have just moved here, so we're trying to keep up. And so our budget is so much, and that's a part of the process, is recognizing that and then moving forward with increasing our maintenance budget, I think.
And maybe to chime in a bit, you know, we went through an exercise, I guess it was end of last summer, August, September-ish, where we developed the roadway kind of maintenance philosophy, because we were having these issues where roads were starting to deteriorate, didn't feel like we were keeping up with maintenance, and took kind of a step back and re-looked at what we were doing. And so while I appreciate the comment that, you know, the budget we have seems low, my recollection, I have to go pull the numbers, but as I recall in previous years, we weren't necessarily spending all the monies we had in those categories even. I think one of the things that we looked at was what were we using our streets crews for? And often you may recall when we were doing road construction down south, we'd send our folks out to do road construction work. It's not what they normally do, don't necessarily have the equipment for it, don't do it regularly, and so it's not something we do well. One of the things I think that Cecilia talked about is the fact that we're having our crew go out once a week per month to do the crack sealing. That wasn't something that we were doing before. And so don't disagree that at the end of this we may get to a point and go, look, that's not enough money. We need to put more money in that budget. But as I recall, we weren't necessarily using all of those funds for those purposes because we weren't putting the crew on it. And so I think part of what we're doing now, as I said, is figuring out how this works for us to what degree are they actually able to go out 1 week a month and actually do that every week, or to what degree they get pulled off on some other project, some other issue, whatever. How many miles are they able to knock out? And I think as the comment came through, now as I understand it, there are equipment that do pothole filling and do crack sealing without the guy necessarily getting out of the back of the truck with a wand. Again, it's an expensive piece of equipment, but much like we bought maybe the vacuum truck for our sewer folks, because they used to go out and skim the lift stations by hand, and we have 20-something of them, almost 30 of them, and they'd go out and skim these things by hand. We got a vacuum truck to go out and do it and increase our efficiency. So again, part of the issue may be as we grow, and we may not quite be there yet, may not sure need is purchasing one-time pieces of equipment to gain some efficiencies. But then I think part of it also, and you see this in different line items, is where we feel like we should do it, or where we feel like we should bring other people in. And part of the roadway philosophy talks about not kind of biting off more than we can chew, but doing the things we can do well, outsourcing what we need to, and then as we're able to train and grow and take on those things we can. So that's a long-winded way of saying we may get to the point where there's not enough funding, but, and Mr. Outlaw may remember this when he was, at some point, we can throw a lot of money at something, and staff does not have the capacity to deal with all of that money. And I think we found that with our previous bond issuances. We'd go out and do these really large road bond issuances, and we couldn't get to it. Even the last, and not this bond, but the 2010 bond, there wasn't discussion about how we would stagger and stage those bond items. And everybody kind of was like, why aren't you building them all at once? Well, no city goes and builds them all at once. They go, this is what we're going to do first, this is what we're going to do second, this is what we're going to do third, this is what we're going to do fourth. And so again, I don't know that, I think in hindsight we could have done a better job telling folks this is the time frame of those, so they don't wonder why everything isn't built at once. And so again, I think that's part of it. We may find we need more money, and that's probably likely the case, but if you threw a bunch more at this budget, I'm not sure we could use that efficiently.
Of the 125,000, is that for material? Is that for machinery? Is that for personnel? Or
It's materials, as I understand it. It's the materials budget.
materials?
Yeah.
Does this assessment program weight roads, arterials, connectors, which road is more important to the traffic flow in the city and should be dealt with first rather than a subdivision road, at the back end of a subdivision which doesn't get much traffic?
Yeah, so if you read the report, and you may not have time, one of the things that Cecilia said is we don't want it to be as subjective in terms of selecting that roads. Maybe to be more blunt, we don't want to be the squeaky wheel. If you can get all your neighborhood out to show up and you get 50 residents here, you can make loud enough noise to get your streets done, even though frankly your streets probably aren't the worst out there. So in the report it talks about what the factors they were that they looked at. So they looked at residential streets, they looked at kind of economic engine streets in commercial areas, they looked at arterials. They did, in fact, part of the selection for these was getting roads at the beginning of a subdivision that are driven on most often. But then a lot of them are kind of economies of scale. You'll notice the recommended roads, they're kind of grouped together in a number of cases. And the idea is to bid those out at once. So part of what they looked at that's talked about is, is to look at those factors. One of the things that would have been problematic is if all of the money had been spent in central Schertz, you had folks in northern and southern Schertz going, hey, what about us? And so there was an awareness of those realities of needing to spend money where it get the biggest bang for the buck. I heard her presentation 3 or 4 times, I think.
We're going to hold off on some of the roads up here in the Northcliffe subdivision where you're going to do the water lines, right?
Yeah, we would not start this knowing we had a water line project coming in on the heels of it.
Well, you've already approved the water lines.
For some of them, yeah. Again,
Yeah.
There's the last phase, and you recall at council 2 weeks ago, they did sort of the last batch. So we would get that through as opposed to doing the road and then having them come in. ready.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Well, and as we do construction and stuff like that, why don't we come back behind ourselves and really repair that street rather than just whatever the construction left us, leave it like that? We wouldn't have such a mess. If you look at Randolph, all the work that went on the last 2 years to get great new infrastructure into a new school, cut that road in about 12 different locations.
Sure, so
And now when you drive Randolph from Main Street, you need a good-sized pick-em-up truck unless you like falling in. Well, we've removed all of the steel, I should say, all the 1-inch, 2-inch steel that you had to bounce over. But we left the roadway, compared to what it was before we did all this infrastructure upgrade, it's terrible. We got places where that stuff built up like a speed bump.
So a couple things to keep in mind is, one is we're not the only ones that cut roads to deal with infrastructure. So again, you may be accurate. Do you know was it water or sewer, Mr. Evans, that was done? Or was it a franchise utility company?
Water, sewer, one of them was an electrical one that was upgraded to take
Yeah.
an additional cable into that same pipe.
So again, if it's electrical, that's a franchise, that's not us. The other issue is, and the point's well taken, I think this is part of, what we'd expect to see from folks who have an opinion on these sorts of things when we do the budget meetings. If your feeling is, when you do a water project or a sewer project and you cut the road, the city needs to then allocate money to come back in and redo the street to the same condition, that's certainly a policy question. But that's a matter of having enough money, and so that's a matter of, if that's important to the folks in the community, then they'll say, it's important enough to us, let's fund those sorts of things. Because at this point, if those funds aren't in the budget, as much as we may all stand around and go, yeah, now the road's torn up, there's no money to fix it. So that's a policy decision. Don't disagree with you, but it's just part of what goes with it. What's that, Mr. Bro?
So if the cable company comes in and cuts the road and they put a new cable in and they come back and say, nah, we don't have enough money to fix the road, so.
Cable
you're gonna
company
live with it.
has to patch it. I mean, they got to come back and patch it. But again, I've not heard of a case often where somebody drives into the cut or the ditch that's left from the utility. But what the franchise does is they come back and they patch it. So if you had a nice, good-looking road, smooth surface, not a blemish on it, when they come in and do that work and they patch it, you can see where that patch is. And we see that all the time. And I think, again, I appreciate the comment. There's a question of how well it's done, but the issue really is you take a good, smooth road surface, and this goes back, I think, to Commissioner Greenwald's comments. If you're doing infrastructure up in Northcliffe, do that first, then come back in and smooth the road over. Otherwise, what you'll see, and everybody can see it in various parts, is you can see where they cut a trench into it and then come back over and patched it. And they may have done a perfectly fine job, but that patch is readily apparent as you look at it and you drive it. So yeah, they have to fix it. But again, I think the comment from Mr. Greenwald is well taken. Have a plan for your utilities, look at that, and if you can, stage it so that you do the infrastructure work, then you do the road surface work right after that. And again, I take Commissioner Evans' comment to be, you really ought to look at budgeting more money to deal with that entire road service when you do those. And again, that's a policy question. So they have to fix it, but again, it's a patch.
The report mentions a couple of times attachment D, and I haven't been able to find an attachment D on the report. I don't know if it's important or not, because I haven't seen it, so I don't know. But
I think one of the attachments, I think attachment D is the second attachment B. I saw that
Oh, is it?
myself, but
Okay.
I think it's just a typo, if I remember correctly.
it may very well be, but I'm sure we paid Mr. Jess Swain a considerable amount of money to prepare this report. So maybe we need to get a refund from Mr. Swain.
Yeah, let us go back and look if there's a typo. And we can
I'm being cynical, but
understood.
it's in the report. And then the attachment F where it talks about, I guess it's a repair to Elbell Road. Is this just an example? of what the report does, or is this an actual project?
No, it's just an example.
It's an
I
example.
believe what they do is they compare it to another road where they did a study at. So they're comparing a recent study and their recommended repair in, I think, Windcrest. And they're using L-Bell to compare those two roads because
Okay.
they're both not residential, they're collector or arterial roads.
Yes,
I think this city needs to look at putting more money in this budget and really taking a hard look at this. Because if I use their cost estimate for a crack sealing of $2 per linear foot, $125,000 gives us a straight line, single crack of 11 miles. That's not going to cut it. And I think we need more money.
There's one question that comes to mind with that comment is we have 27 pages here that list every street that we have. What's the total dollar amount of the potential repair cost on those 27 pages?
You know, frankly, I don't know that I ever spent a lot of time with that because while that's a today dollar figure, and I think this is again part of the issue we've got with some of this stuff, it's a today dollar figure. Those costs will escalate over time. So again, it's worth looking at an order of magnitude. The other is, and this is a policy question, and it kind of goes back if you ask everybody, if you want every one of your roads to always score above a 90, is that something you want? Most people go, yeah, that'd be great. And then we could come back and say, this is what it would cost to maintain that. And likely all of you would go, yeah, it's okay. That's probably too high. And so one of the things that I think is a bit of a qualitative aspect of this is, you know, as we implement this new roadway maintenance philosophy, we get a couple of years under our belt, and so we start doing some maintenance things that we really weren't doing as much of before, like the seal coat and things like that. It's to look at that and say, what do we think about the condition of our roads, and how bad do they kind of need to get before we do that work? And so there's a dollar figure there, but to some degree it's useful, I guess, as a little bit of order of magnitude, but because we're not planning for that horizon, it doesn't get us there. Now, again, it may be useful for Mr. Bro's question of how much do I want to accomplish every year to kind of balance that, but I'd caution to not latch onto that number, and we can tally it up and get it to you, because we couldn't do it in 1 year, and so that would escalate over time, and so you'd have to add a factor to it.
Obviously,
Can I say something? So I spent a lot of time working with the design firm, and I added up the numbers, and I believe it's about $25 million. But that doesn't include the design. That doesn't include things like utilities. So there's a lot more that we have to look at, which is why the engineering department is moving forward with having one of our on-call design firms look at those first-year budget and second-year budget roads and give us, a proposal for design, which will include things like drainage, things like utilities, sidewalks. So this is just a basic estimate for just the asphalt, just the road, just the base repair. It doesn't include a lot of other elements that could happen. And things like traffic volumes, maybe we need to add a lane, things like that. So, this is just 25 million, which leaves a lot of other things out. So, costs add up quickly.
But I will say again, if the community's feeling is we want to be doing more a year, then that's certainly a policy question that, again, we can fund at a higher level, we can add staff to the degree that we need to, we can contract out certain types of repairs and improvements that are done more cost effectively, going forward as we ramp up. Again, I think staff's position is if you look back where we were using our staff, it wasn't necessarily on maintenance to the degree that we felt like they should. And so it'll be interesting to see what the perception is, even once Schertz Parkway is done and this first round of road repair maintenance is done, to kind of get a feel from the community where we stand.
And I don't disagree with anything that you're saying in the philosophy. We went through that quite extensively on the CCAB.
Yeah.
And talked about that quite a bit. I guess the point, with projected cost, 25 million plus and $100,000 a year repair budget, for me as a taxpayer, my view is that, the role of the city is to provide for public safety, your fire, EMS, transportation, water, sewer, wastewater. And, to have upwards of a $60 million a year annual budget to commit $100,000 to this is probably something that we ought to revisit.
And again, I would just simply caution, that's one line item, so if you tally, and we can get it for you, and you still may look at it and go, it's not enough. I appreciate the sentiment. There are others who would also say we ought to fund quality of life issues. When I go to library board meeting, I get that side of it, Parks Board, I get that side of it. So just to be clear, this is one line item associated with that, not the complete thing. And just to be clear, with this notice that was approved last night, council provided funding. We if the sale goes through, we'll have funding for the first 2 years of the recommended amount. So we'll have $3.2 million to spend on road repair and road maintenance at the bigger projects.
Let me jump in here real quick with just a personal comment, Michael, that when you go to every street, every road in Schertz is in this list, including the street that in front of my house, Forsyth Park. And so if you come across here, you'll see, they rated in the 80s, but they're still way out on the right-hand side. There's a repair estimate. Forsyth Park in front of my house doesn't need any repair. Okay, that crack seal that they did several years ago is holding up really well. So that number that Cecilia gave us, 25 million, that, some of that is probably, doesn't need to be done today. So, just an
Quite possibly, and again, for discussion purposes, and I agree, I think we're on the right track and becoming more professional, more systematic about how we're going about doing it, and, we just got to figure it out.
No, I would agree. And as Cecilia said, some of this stuff is preventative. If we go out and we do the crack sealing where appropriate, if we do seal coat where appropriate, we do some of those things, as our graph showed, we then don't have to come out and rebuild the road as often. So again, it's not just the amount of money, it's how we're using those funds and what we're doing to try to extend the life of our roads.
And one of the things we wrestled with at TSAC last week when we saw this presentation was that in our minds we have an idea of what a quality road looks like. And I think part of what we saw listening to the IDS presentation is things have got to be pretty bad to get down in the lower numbers. Again, talking about my street, I think it's rated an 83 or something like that. But some of us questioned, and I guess what I'm saying is the program, given their factors, a road's got to be really icky before those numbers start to really get down. And so we kind of wrestled with that as a group. We trying to grab hold of that scale.
Yeah.
Cecilia, how do you do this? Do you do it riding in a vehicle, or do you actually walk?
No, we do it riding in the vehicle.
Okay. I'd be curious to see the scores for Schertz Parkway from between June 13th of last year and today. It'd be fun to see that. I might do that with you one day if you want.
Well, actually, on Bell, Public Works does crack sealing to get ready for the school year. So Bell was analyzed back in, I think, March in the study. So we went back and did it after the crack seal, and so it went from a blue to a green. So, and that was just a preventative maintenance measure. So, and they trained us how to do that. So if we wanted to go and do some work, we could go back and reevaluate it and see see those numbers go up.
So what's the plan on how often to do this?
Every fourth year, it says in the budget there where it says planning, on the fourth year, to
Every fourth
redo
year.
the study.
Okay, thank you.
From a personal standpoint, one of the things that's bothersome in this approach is obviously you have to be flexible. But once you make your choices as to which are the streets we're going to cover for X amount, my street, for example, over a period of about 20 months, had the main water main break 6 times.
You must live in Northcliffe.
I live in Greenshire, and Bent Tree
Okay.
just had one right after the other. Wasn't by itself, because there were other areas in the city that were suffering the same thing, given that all those streets were put in the mid to late 80s, and a lot of contractors just did a bare minimum. So instead of putting the sewer main or the water main on a sand bed, it's surrounded by the largest boulders they could throw back in there, courtesy of, a truck. So no wonder they cracked and broke. But, and that was also a function of the weather. We watched us go from very cold and wet to extremely hot and no rain and so forth, and that give and take. I had long conversations with Public Works when they were out there doing the repair, and they no sooner get one taken care of than 3 houses down would break and they're back. And what suffers in that, not only does the budget suffer, but the street suffers, because the street repair for something like that, they do their best to avoid tearing up the street any more than necessary, but you go along and you get a patch, and you get a patch, and you get a patch, and eventually that first patch begins to wear, and they're back, patching again. So I guess I have a hard time understanding how those things are built into the budget. Well, we know they're going to happen. We know that the weather can't be predicted. But in South Texas, we know that we've got to be cognizant of the fact that the weather is going to hamper us on these street repairs all the time.
Well, maybe I'd offer this up. I think what I took from your comments is that, we do this every 4 years, but we obviously have things happen in the intervening years. And so we may have a section of line that gets a number of breaks and patched, and so it deteriorates at a much more rapid rate, if you will, than the others. Frankly, it's a policy question. How often do we want to do this? There are 2 things. One is, when do we want to spend the staff time and money, which this eats up, to do the study? And how often is that, do we get enough of a change to warrant it? The other part of it really, I think, is part of the issue of, by having the kind of 4 or 5 year model, it gives people a comfort level that if they show up on year 4, their street's going to get done, and they're not going to continue to be leapfrogged by folks. I mean, there's a bit of that. So not to disagree with you, if folks can go, look, if we did it now, we may prioritize this differently than we did when we did the study. But I think that's sort of an ongoing thing, and the idea is to find that right window to say, we're not doing it so often that we're kind of wasting time and money, there's not enough change. And then also, we're not creating a frustration of people constantly getting bumped. I think it's important that when we have the list, we get through the list. And I would argue, and maybe this is where I would agree with Mr. Bromore, is if we need to budget additional funds to deal with those things, then that's really the appropriate solution, as opposed to getting off track on this. I will say this as well. I think what we've learned from the roadway philosophy, we could probably apply to a number of different areas. Again, the question is, at what point, how many breaks do we have in a water line on a section of street before the guys say, hold on, this is the X number in X amount of time. We've seen each time why it's happening. We know it's going to continue again, and then we go ahead and make the repair of the whole line. And so again, I think your comment was you had 5 or 6 breaks occur in a period of, 20 months. At what point does that get flagged and we go, we have a bigger problem here, so that we don't do, and the number may be higher than that, we don't do more than 10 in 20 months, or we don't do more than 5 in 20 months, but there's something to flag it, and there's money in the budget again to say, we got out the first 2 times, we saw the problem, we anticipate we're going to have it again, let's get out and replace the whole line, as opposed to going out and patching it multiple times. And if you do that and you do it all at once, the patch job may be better, and then it doesn't have the deterioration on the road. And so, again, I think this is where you get really complicated with this stuff is roads don't sort of live and deteriorate in isolation. As was mentioned, franchise utility comes out and do work. We have line breaks. We have things like that. So don't disagree to Mr. Evans' point. You ought to budget money to do a repair of the street, and I would argue that we need to be tracking those breaks and at some point say, enough's enough, we spent too much time and money. Maybe a good analogy is when we have infiltration in our sewer system. You know, when we have infiltration, that costs us additional money, costs the taxpayers money, as we have to treat that rainwater that's infiltrated the system. And if we know we're having an area with a problem, at what point does it become worth it? You've got to have the funds to do it, but go in and do that, replace those sections, and it pays for itself over time. And I think there's a similar thing that can be said with water and as well with that.
All right, this is just a discussion item on our agenda, no action required or requested. Any further comments from commissioners? Appreciate the presentation, Cecilia.
You're welcome.
Difficult
I had a
subject to
question
have
for
to deal
Mr.
with.
Broad. That mistake on that attachment, that could have been me because I was assigned to review the final report. And I'm wondering, actually, there were a lot of revisions. I'm wondering if you guys have the correct report. Yeah, I'll double check it.
I would have blamed the engineer, but that's all right.
Well, and I want to say that, when we picked this design firm, there was a study previously done, and this time around, we hired someone that could help us use the software that we already own and keep using it. So it wasn't like they gave us a product and they left. So, and they have continuously communicated with us, and if I need help or a question with the software, they come out and they're glad to help us work through it. So, and they're a local firm, and so I think they've been great.
As Mr. Outlaw said, they came back out to TSAC.
Came back out to
do a more
TSAC, they did a
detailed
presentation.
and answer some questions.
That's good. It sounds like money well spent in that case.
Thank you.
All right, the next workshop and discussion on our agenda, item 4B, again, is a public hearing, workshop, and discussion regarding the Master Thoroughfare Plan update.
Commissioners, this is really just to sort of refresh your memory as we roll back into the thoroughfare plan to kind of, again, get better use of our consultants' time versus our time and your time. So wanted to just remind everybody what we're doing real quick with regard to the thoroughfare plan update. And again, what we're doing is an update to the thoroughfare plan, and then on the heels of that is a roadway impact fee, which we're planning to propose be adopted as well. Currently, the city of Schertz has utility impact fees, so there's an impact fee that's paid for water and sewer, and that, again, is charged to new development. So again, when a house is built or when a building is built, to cover the costs associated with expanding the system to have enough capacity to accommodate them. And so state law allows us to do the same thing with roads. And so again, to the comment before, we have a pot of money for repair and maintenance. We've got a pot of money for new road construction as well. And again, I think some of the discussion on the PCI was, well, that road hasn't been improved yet, and so we're kind of looking at a narrower section and edging and things like that. And so again, the idea would be a charge on new development to go to construct and improve roads to add capacity based on the amount generated. Again, it deals with some of the frustrations I think that have occurred on rough proportionality. As you know, the developer who's adjacent to the road is obligated to build it, but the guy who's back off it a ways doesn't have to build anything. And again, it would be that developer who's back off it a ways would now pay a roadway impact fee, could go to make some of those improvements. So, but again, just to remind kind of what we've got, the thoroughfare plan starts out with kind of guiding goals and objectives. It was key to kind of figure out what does our community want, and every community is a bit different, but one of the key one is access and mobility for residents. I think we heard a lot of people say, traffic is so bad in Austin, traffic is so bad in New Braunfels, traffic is so bad in Abilene, for example, and we don't want to be like them with that. And so again, it seems to be centered on how we keep our residents moving efficiently going forward. And I think we've heard a little bit about that with the lights that have gone in on 3009. Again, the point of those lights is to get traffic moving more efficiently, but for those folks who weren't turning off a side street, who don't live in a street with busted water lines that they're trying to get out of and over and then make a turn onto 3009, that tends to be the complaint. If you live on one of the adjacent neighborhoods, you're kind of happy the lights have gone in. If you're somebody who doesn't, and you were just trying to get from point A to point B, 35 to 78, man, what a delay. So that's part of what goes to it. So I think a key is to make sure we keep our residents moving forward. The other is have kind of local context and character preference. Again, the comp plan for the city has some very distinct areas of the community with much lower densities up north and down south. The context and the character and the feel of those roads doesn't necessarily need to be the same as in a more developed area, an industrial area, things like that. Part of that goes to what everybody says with regard to 3009 and the raised medians and things like that. As we've had conversations with TxDOT about FM 1518 improvements, there have been conversations about landscaping within a potential raised median, what TxDOT normally does, what maybe the city would want to see happen going forward. Again, part of it is preserving existing infrastructure so that we kind of maximize the use of what we have to follow existing roads, and then clearly fiscal stewardship so that we're building roads in a timely manner, but we're not overbuilding and wasting money. Focused a bit on the transportation system needs. Again, we talked a lot in the last slide about focusing on our residents and local mobility. But the reality is we're within a growing area, and there are a lot of cities around us that do a lot of different things to generate traffic. You may have heard on the other side of I-10, there's a big residential development going in that's an SCUC ISD and East Central ISD and some of the small communities out that way. That will generate traffic in our community as those folks try to get to 35 or where they need to go. So we need to focus on those regional mobility and connections. We don't live in a vacuum. And again, Cibolo does, San Antonio does, New Braunfels does, that affects us, so we need to be aware of that. Two key components, and I think they're very different though, are north-south connectivity and east-west connectivity. The issue, as we've talked about a lot with north-south connectivity, is there really isn't very much of it. There is not a direct route between central Schertz and southern Schertz, and then given the shape of our city, even if you look up north, how you kind of move across roads, a lot of the roads on this side of 35 up north don't extend across 35, where they have a very different character, heavy truck construction traffic associated with the quarry and some of those industrial uses. East-west connectivity, we've got the roads, they're just often not improved, or if you look down south, Benz-Engelman to Trainer Hale, you're kind of going, wait, those don't connect. That's a real circuitous route. You can get there, but it's not necessarily easy. So again, I think the study notes we have two different issues. We need to maintain the connectivity both ways, but to some degree, I'd say with east-west, it's about enhancing, filling in a few connections. North-south, it's really, we struggle because we don't have those direct connections, and they're not easy to make, both cost, due to the railroad, due to the Cibolo Creek, and due to impact on existing development. But again, that occurs east-west as well, where we connect with other cities too. It's not always easy, and so that's duly noted. Lastly, part of what we looked at are traffic volumes and congestion, and that's a large function of this, and looking at where we can make some improvements. The study notes where we need to do intersection improvements. Going back to the comment with regard to discussions I've had with a few of you that I enjoy a lot, some of the roads that tie into Schertz Parkway, if the pavement's not striped correctly to let drivers know you need to scooch to one side of the road, they back up traffic as they try to make a left and prevent people from making a right, coming out of Woodland Oaks Drive. So some of it's fairly simple. Paint it, maintain the paint, signage, etc. We have a complaint from residents in the Lone Oak subdivision off 78 that folks on 78 back up, block the entrance exit into their subdivision as well. But then we've got situations like we have at Live Oak and Schertz Parkway where there's one lane. And so, man, I really want to make a right turn to go visit Mr. Bro at his house, but I'm having to wait because people are making a left and they're trying to get to the high school and things like that. And again, as we talked about, coming in and adding that right turn lane is much more expensive than getting it built. So part of what we talked about with that traffic volumes and congestion are intersection improvements and things like that. It also goes to safety. Part of what the consultant did is look at accident data that we had, see where those were, try to figure out maybe why some of those things were occurring, and look at where we can do some things with our thoroughfare plan to mitigate those as well going forward. Again, Schertz Parkway is very nice and very curvy, but again, how often is it that one drives down there and you go, oh, there's been a wreck, there's another tree taken out, or there's another light pole taken out? And design goes into that sort of thing. How often you allow right turn lanes or decel lanes, left turn lanes, and things like that. There are also, and I'll look at the folks who push these issues, non-auto considerations as well that we've included. And that's motorized vehicles too. So it's Alamo Regional Transit, the ART system. They operate the on-call, on-demand system. In fact, they just sent over the bill for this year, which is I think about $28,000 for that service. Express bus and van pool parking. You guys may know folks park in the back lot behind our buildings for ride sharing, and happy to have that happen going forward. And then again, there's been discussion about rail service. Lone Star Rail seems to be a bit on its last legs. We're kind of waiting to see if somebody pulls the plug on it or not. You know, frankly, we're one of a number of the smaller communities and not likely to drive that decision. One of the bigger entities is, so we're kind of waiting and watching with it. Again, there have been discussions about some other entity taking its place, looking at different solutions. If that occurs, that solution may or may not come through Schertz, and we'll see where it goes, but certainly want to be part of that as it goes forward. And frankly, if something happens in a different location, that may be a good way to build support for that type of thing. So again, down the road, because there are going to be people living here 20, 30, 40 years from now you do a different project. But the other part is bicycling and walking. So that includes on-street bicycling. But we've talked a lot about where we have bike lanes. Where does that bike lane go? Does it just sort of stop in the middle of nowhere? Is it appropriately done when you get to an intersection? Have we looked at where on-street parking occurs relative to that? Shared use paths, so hike and bike trails, and then sidewalk connections as well. Again, and I appreciate the comment about the road repair, one thing that TSAC has talked about in the past is we really need a pot of money that we don't have to fill in gaps in sidewalks, you know. So where are we up in Northcliffe or areas like that where there's a section of 2 houses and no sidewalk? There needs to be a pot of money to come in and fix that or fill in that section. So that's part of it as well. Again, we've done a lot of work to try to deal with some of the ADA issues in new sidewalk connections to make sure those occur. A bit of positive is, you know, one of the things where I think that's working is we caught the problems we were having up at Misty Wood just up the way, and so you notice that lingered for a while there with the sidewalk. They've come and made an addition to get the slope what it needs to be with a bit of an alternate route for that. So filling those into our systems, again, avoiding putting things in the middle of the sidewalk. So yeah, we've got a 4 or 5 foot sidewalk, but there's a utility box smack in the middle of it, things like that. So again, I'm not going to cover the actual plan, and that's where I think the bulk of time will be, but just to note, you know, what we have is our transportation plan and trails network. So again, this covers those hike and bike trail linkages and connections. We want to make sure we use our creek corridors, our drainage corridors, our utility transformer corridors and things like that to make some of those connections that we have as we go forward. Again, the issue I think you'll find on this, while you may look at this and go, that seems to be a no-brainer, everybody loves that stuff, it's often not as popular to have that going through. So again, you may have a person in a rural area concerned that at some point the city is going to come through and put in a hike and bike trail through there, require an easement. There are going to be people traipsing over their property. Again, with developed subdivisions, you often have concern about neighboring subdivisions and accessibility and things like that. So while, again, there's a lot of support for this, you do have opposition to it generally for those sorts of reasons. And then we've got the thoroughfare plan. Again, part of where we've been giving comments back to the consultant is to be clear on some of those future sections where there aren't roads today. Those are the biggest challenges. I think people get there's a road there today, it's going to be expanded. But again, if there's not a road there today, you need to make a connection. That's a little more challenging. We've been in discussions with the consultant about putting in language to make sure we look at a variety of factors with those alignments. So again, straddling property lines where appropriate, avoiding sensitive environmental areas or areas of historic importance, and limiting the impact on property owners. So where we can, again, we want to straddle property lines and things like that. To be blunt, it's not always possible, and sometimes you've got to go through the middle of property. We've heard that up generally off of 35 up north, that area in there where we've had some property owners and some of that the backage roads come through that provide a parallel road to the freeway. That's been a bit of an issue going forward. But again, those play an important role. If folks don't have that route that's not on the frontage road, not on the freeway, they start cutting through neighborhoods, and then we get issues there. So again, part of what the study does is make very clear the distinction between roads, freeways, principal arterials, minor arterials, collectors, and local streets. So again, different levels of streets, different widths, different character, different spacing for curb cuts and things like that, different intersection configurations as well, based on how they handle that. Part of what's in the design guideline, because you can't always plan for things in advance, are to make sure that we try where possible to do complete streets. Again, it goes back to making sure we don't just think about our road system for cars, but that we look at other forms of transportation, pedestrians, bicyclists, et cetera. I think everybody in hindsight probably wishes that we had gone with a hike and bike trail on the opposite side of Schertz Parkway for a distance up by Pascal. You see a lot of kids walking up and down the opposite side of Schertz Parkway trying to get to Pascal, and that's a narrow sidewalk. And so again, probably would warrant being a bit wider with the number of kids you see out there on bikes and skateboards and things like that. The other is, again, it's context sensitive. So again, we may need to move traffic, but we may want the look and feel of the road to be a bit different depending on the area. So again, in a more of a rural area, may have a bit different feel and look that's warranted than in a developed area. The last thing is corridor and access management. So part of what affects how much traffic is on roads are, do we have raised medians? They look great, but what it means is you don't have that free left turn. You've got to go down to a median opening and what's your spacing on that. Again, if you look at Schertz Parkway, around this area, there isn't those medians. If you're trying to turn into the shopping center up here, those cars cannot get out of that left lane of traffic. Very often they hang into the back of that because of how frequent that is. So there are negative implications of that too. It's telling people you can't have as many openings as you may want. You've got to move to driveway consolidation where we do shared drives and things like that. So again, if you're going to stop off and pick up a Diet Coke or something on the way to visit Mr. Bro, you may have to go well beyond the convenience store at the corner to be able to turn in because of that shared drive. And that's what that's about. It really is. We've been on those streets in those communities where literally as soon as one drive approach ends, the next one starts, and it's like that, and you just stop and stop and stop as people are coming in, as opposed to you've got a driveway, vehicles move, and then everybody kind of turns into one location and comes down. Pedestrian crossings are key. Again, we struggle with that a bit around Clemens High School. The high school kids feel like every place along Schertz Parkway is their own pedestrian crossing. The challenge is get them to move to one. But again, the more convenient you can make it, the more you think it through, the better that is. Key mobility intersections, I talked about it before. That's flaring those intersections. So again, at Live Oak, we think, let's make sure we have a right turn lane so we can get to Mr. Bro's house more quickly. Perhaps he's having a party he's invited us all to celebrate his birthday or something like that, and we don't want to get hung up. The last part of it is impact fees. Again, just to be clear, It's based on the thoroughfare plan, so that really follows on the heels of this. The function of it is the impact fee is based on what roads are system roadways, how wide are those roads, what do they look like, and then we do some estimates of cost. And those are really rough estimates based on some typical sections. But you don't want to do that work till everybody says, yeah, this is the thoroughfare plan, these are the system roads. Again, to be clear, what we plan to do is, unlike utility impact fees, roadway impact fees have a limited diameter or distance across. And so we can't do one large roadway impact fee service area for the city. We have to do smaller ones, and so I think we've got about 4 or 5 of them planned for the city. Those funds are collected within that area, have to be spent within that area. As you can imagine, the cost of constructing the roads in each service area may be different. So again, in central Schertz, you may have a much lower impact fee than northern or southern Schertz because there are fewer roads to build there. We have tried to align those boundaries where we have major expensive sections. So if you have an expensive bridge section, you typically want that to be the point where it splits. So half the bridge gets paid by this service area, half gets paid by that service area. Helps you fund it as opposed to shifting all the cost on one of those areas as it goes forward. And obviously you have to set what you want that amount to be as you go forward. So the impact fee will come on the heels of the thoroughfare plan. Likely it'll be a stage process. We'll say, here's the growth projections, which are part of it, get those approved, along with here are the estimated cost of the roads, get those approved, and then we will likely come back and go, based on all that, here's what the fee is. Because what we don't want to have happen is people attack the growth projections or the cost estimates because their issue is with what the fee is. We should have those discussions, see if they're right, and then frankly, as a policy decision, we can establish those fees based on those within the limits of state law. So get agreement on the one. Let's not try to backdoor a fee by unfairly attacking those estimates. I think that's probably a better way to go. The other thing we'll likely do that's a bit different from the utility impact fees is rather than designated, because again, it assumes the cost of a road you'll build within a shorter horizon, and rather than select this road will be built, this road won't, this road will be built, this road won't, this road won't, this section of a road won't, we'll never get that right. The idea is you make every road a system roadway, and then you pull back on the percentage of the fee based on how much is anticipated to be built, and that tends to be a better system. So we're planning to do that going forward. And I think it tends to be a fairer system for developers as well. So again, the idea is just to sort of refresh your mind on this. Again, big issues we will have when we come forward and actually ask you for a recommendation, likely that we've heard are road alignments going through property that doesn't currently have a road. That will be something that'll be a challenge for us. The other big one is the 3009 extension. The recommendation on the part of the consultant is to maintain that. We've had some discussions about can we come across and then pull down. I think the concern they had is we start dumping a whole lot of traffic into a point at an intersection as opposed to needing to move it through. But we'll talk through that when we come forward with that going forward. I think that 3009 will be a big issue as well, trying to fit it in there. Again, if we don't have it on the plan, you don't have the possibility to have it happen. If you have it on the plan, doesn't guarantee it'll ever get built, but if you don't have it, you can guarantee that things will occur and it won't get built as well. So again, with that, just wanted to refresh your memory, but I'll answer any questions you've got.
Ryan, are we participating to any degree with Cibolo and the proposed toll road from 78 to 10?
Wow. So, yeah, I don't know anything about that. So here's, as you know, just because you may not have attended, City of Schertz held a special council meeting a week ago, Monday, based on what I'd call a flare-up that occurred with social media with regard to the tollway. And that really involved a lot of our residents with, I believe, some council people from Cibolo weighing in with information. And so the idea was to do a work session to sort of hear some input, talk about it. I think what came out of that is that we need a lot more information. You know, I certainly don't speak for city council, but what seemed to be consensus on at that work session was when we went to our voters for the bond, it was for a particular type of project, and it's going to be problematic if that type of project doesn't occur. We told the voters this is what we're going to do. We expect for that to occur. There are concerns about how, frankly, there are questions about what Cibolo's toll project is. Even in reading the agreement and then hearing some other information, I'm not entirely clear on exactly what's occurring on one section of that toll road. Bit of history. What was originally sort of discussed that we sort of heard about and heard people talking about was effectively from Steele High School, I'll say, down to I-10. And I understood it to be typical sort of tollway, typical sort of thing. And then we had this project coming through here. As part of it, they have a proposal for this section now to 35. What I think drew a lot of people's attention is where it made references to extending all the way to 35 and into Schertz, and the impact of plans that they had even just within Cibolo on traffic here. If you're effectively running a tollway and you're stopping it a mile before 35, what does that do to all the work we've done with levels of service and things like that? So I think what came out of it is we need a lot more information. There's some key areas of concerns that Schertz has going forward, and that we need to have a better understanding from Cibolo. Now, I will say, if you're interested, and some folks may have looked at it, Cibolo, there was an item on their last night's agenda from Mayor Dunn where he sort of talked through this. Again, don't speak for council, but having seen cities have these sort of issues, it was good to hear him say a lot of the things he said. He seemed to have an awareness of the relationship of Schertz, the relationship that the cities have tried to build over the years, and the need to kind of work together on stuff. It was positive, and so I think there needs to be a lot more communication and understanding going forward. But at this point, City of Schertz has not bought off into anything other, and all the conversations we've had on TxDOT have been the same kind of section, I'll call it, as we've talked about for 1518. It's that kind of Schertz Parkway section, not elevated lanes or elevated flyovers or things like that.
Just real quick, can I also comment that we have this listed as a public hearing?
Oh, yes.
Is the impact fee for new construction only, or does it include repair as well?
So
Yeah, we did. We just kind of rolled through the public hearing on this.
Yeah, we need to officially open and close the public hearing.
True. So we'll open the public hearing at 7:18 on the Master Thoroughfare Plan update. If anyone wishes to comment further. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, 7:19. And commissioners, further or closing comments?
My previous question, is it just for new construction?
So there's a trigger as it defines new construction. So again, if you had, say, an existing restaurant and they wanted to expand to grow the square footage, to say double in size, to add on an addition, that would likely trigger it as well. Typically for single family though, no, you want to renovate your house, you want to add on to your house, that would not trigger a new impact fee. But again, if you had an existing business that say had a 5,000 square foot footprint, they came and said, hey, we need to grow it, we need to add another 5,000 square feet on, that would likely trigger the impact fee for that new square footage.
I'm referring to the impact fee itself. What can that be used for? Can it be used only for new road construction, or can it be used for repair?
It cannot be used for repair.
So it's just
It
new.
has to add capacity to the system. So what will develop out of this, much like we have with water and sewer, is a capital improvements program for impact fees, and it can be used for those things. So again, what it can be used for is intersection improvements. If you include that, if you expand an intersection to add capacity, you can use it for that. But you can't use it to make up on stuff you're already behind on, nor can you use it for repair.
And on an earlier comment, you talked about 3009 and putting more streetlights in there. I've driven it numerous times on Pat Booker from Randolph all the way to 35 without stopping. Is TxDOT going to spend the money to sync those lights as well, so that I can go from 35 to 78 without stopping?
And let me say this, I'll have to look to Mr. Outlaw and maybe Ms. Paloma, who were here, and that was discussed at TSAC, to help me with that answer.
Because it's quite often I can go all the way on Pat Booker and not stop.
TxDOT is currently doing a study for the retiming of those lights. So they're going to be doing that, as well as FM 78 connecting Schertz or Cibolo to UC. If they're not done with that study, they're working on it.
But I know it's not cheap, and knowing TxDOT, I don't have much confidence in it, but we'll see.
Right. I asked that question at TSAC, and the TxDOT representative, the specific question was about the new traffic signal at Dimrock, whether that was going to be synchronized with Woodland Oaks and the others. And his reply is they're installing new radio systems, and I've noticed those. I've started looking, and you see, I believe they're the square white, boxy looking. I think those are the antennas. Now, I don't think they'll include probably the ones at 35, but I think probably from Circle Oak or Savannah Drive, Woodland Oaks, I think their intent, and again, he made clear that it will only be, they can sync it for a certain amount of traffic, so it's not always going to work. But his indication, as Cecilia said, that yes, it is their intent to.
I will say that, as you said, it works for a certain amount of traffic. So if your roads are over capacity and you have a really low level of service, that synchronization is not going to work. That's where you need to size roads, despite people saying, I don't want another 2 lanes added, or why do we have to build this other road? That all works in that system.
One of TxDOT's concerns, of course, is like most of us, and I can be a little impatient. I have noticed that as I come down Savannah Drive to 3009, that traffic signal, I seem to sit there a lot longer than I used to. And that's part of the problem that TxDOT is wrestling with in order to keep the traffic moving on the thoroughfare, is they may have to make the side roads sit a little bit, sit a little bit longer.
Well, it's just if Universal City and Pat Booker can do it, it's going to be really embarrassing if we can't get it on 3009.
So let me be real clear again.
And that system on Pat Booker's been there for 5 or 6 years.
So let me be real clear what part of plays into this. If you have a really low level of service, if your roads do not provide the capacity that you need, you can't synchronize signals. And so just to be clear, let me kind of come back to it again. If you don't have a robust enough road network, that is part of what plays into it. So it's not the technical engineering, can I make them all switch? It's how many cars am I trying to get through? Because you can have them all synced, and yet you're still sitting there going, I haven't moved. I saw them all turn green. I saw them all turn red, but nobody got through. That's part of what goes to that. And that's also why I talked about it's not just north-south, it's east-west. If those east-west roads are not sized to accommodate that traffic, you'll get things like you get at the intersections backing up, which affect it as well. You've got to have it all work in concert. So again, I would argue the biggest challenge we have is having a robust enough road network to accommodate the anticipated traffic that we need. And you'll see that at times. You'll see roads that are a 2-lane road needs to go to a 4-lane road, and neighborhoods adjacent kind of get up in arms going, oh, I don't want to expand it, don't want that much traffic. If you don't do that, it affects everything else. But point is well taken. But again, I would say it's more than just the engineering mechanics of syncing the lights. It's having the right amount of cars on that so that functions.
Pat Booker's a busy street.
Yes, it is. Well, my comment at TSAC is from Savannah Drive, it seems like that light turns green and I turn left to go north just as the Circle Oak light is turning red. And the same thing as I turn to come south, I'll normally hit the Green Valley light. So it looks like they're trying to, because they've already got traffic stopped on 3009. So it looks like they're making the
So
attempt.
just as an example, Pat Booker's not a raised median, so free left the whole way.
Yeah.
That is a factor. What we heard from folks is, we really like Schertz Parkway. I think I heard that from probably every one of you. I like that look of Schertz Parkway, like that feel. There are pros and cons to everything we do. And so if you want to have the raised landscape median on 1103, on 1518, that's going to function in a different way than that free left that you can move the whole way. Because that's where Pat Booker in part works, is they've got those decel lanes, they've got those right turn lanes. You can pretty easily move on and off. There isn't anybody sitting in that that left lane blocking cars as they try to make a left. They can get over and get out of the line of traffic. So again, it all works together.
Mr. James, I wanted to ask you, is there a timetable? I know I've seen the thoroughfare plan and impact fees. We seem to have been working on them for quite a while.
Yeah, we paused it with the election. Again, the idea was probably not the best idea to run that with the election, going forward. So we're ready to ramp up. So again, we're going to come back next meeting with the consultant, and we're start looking for recommendation and knock this thing out. The good news is then engineering gets to start updating the water and sewer master plans, so they have their work cut out. So I think at this point, we're ready to go. Again, we may be able to achieve some additional consensus, but I'm confident that we know what the issues that folks are going to have problems, and we've spent time looking at it and thinking about it. Again, I don't know how much we'll get everybody on board. At some point, it comes down to, you want to punch 3009 through or not. This is the implication. We just need to make a decision and kind of move on.
As part of your looking at the plans there, was there also any consideration for any type of potential future improvements for connectivity between 78 and 3009?
In terms of the intersection,
Yes.
yeah, likely that intersection will be greatly improved. So again, and this has been a bit of an issue on 1103, and I think it goes in large part to your land use plan. In my experience, residents have much more of an issue with elevated flyovers and elevated sections than do businesses. Businesses, it's a business decision about access. Can my customers get to me easy enough or not? With residents, it's about quality of life and impact. And so, what's been discussed and what we've looked at with things is an elevated section of 3009 over 78. So that intersection will change. We have been in discussions with TxDOT about 1518 coming into 78 as well, and how that will play in. Again, I think I've said this before, those two major north-south connections, we have to have direct connections, and we can't have intersections there entirely. You've got to be able to get over it. Again, I think to go back to the toll discussion we have is, you plan for land uses that you don't negatively impact with those sorts of things, as opposed to you're flying over and you're looking down into somebody's backyard. That's where it becomes problematic. So yeah, the intersections, there's discussion about are planned to be different down the road than they are today. If that's your question. Yeah.
Another question, down in the Southern Schertz, for years, we've been setting aside right away for Lazar Parkway. Is there any looking at,
It will likely go away.
so what's going to happen to that right away?
That'll be a conversation with the residents of the adjacent neighborhood. We've been in contact with them. You've got state law requirements as to what happens with right-of-way that's dedicated via plat and where it were to go. But again, there are utilities in there. There's drainage that goes through there. It's not necessarily usable. It's not really something I think that the residents want to extend out their back fence and then pick up the drainage and the utilities and the things that go with it. So certainly there may be discussions about a linear park system back through there as well. It's a nice wide section in doing some things there, but that we'll have to get to. So the decision is it needed as a road? Is or it isn't? If it's not, then we start on that process.
And you said the timeline for this is our next meeting for bringing?
We're looking to run, probably have the consultant next meeting. We may not ask for action next meeting. We may make it the meeting after that because of the notices we have to do and to give people ample time on it.
So you know my opinion on 3009, and we'll have that conversation then, I guess.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I will say this, this is, and I appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate the diversity of opinions, and I think it's rare that you'll hear me look at somebody and say, yeah, I think you're entirely wrong. I think they're valid concerns that we hear from folks. There isn't on this stuff a right or wrong answer. I'm a firm believer in that. There are implications to every decision we make, and so again, we punch a road through, it impacts those property owners, it impacts people in the vicinity, and you can point out those negative implications in splicing property, additional traffic in the area, et cetera. But again, to not do it, while you may deal with those issues, you create different issues in different areas. And so it really is about making an informed decision and saying, we understand the pros and cons of each, and this isn't, as a whole, which way we're going to go. But I think it's rare on this stuff that you'll hear me say people are just totally wrong. I think often the one area where I will disagree is the kind of concept that development drives infrastructure doesn't drive development. I think it works both ways. I think we'll see that with the sewer treatment plant. That infrastructure will drive development in Southern Schertz. I'd be the first to admit that. And I think a lot of the opposition with the lines we've seen is because the feeling that will drive development. That's a valid concern.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Next on our agenda, item 5, requests and announcements, first by commissioners. And if none, then to staff.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I saw that as two separate. I would like to make one announcement, if I might.
Sure, Glenn, go ahead.
I just wanted to let my fellow commission members know that I attended the past two city council meetings where city council took up the issue that we did at our last meeting about amending the language in the comprehensive land plan in relation to the JLUs. And at last night's meeting, at the recommendation of staff, council decided to take no action on that item.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to remind everybody, Tiffany sent out a notice to everybody about the volunteer fair tomorrow. It's always nice to have one of you there to talk to folks, to tell them what your experiences are on the commission and the things that you do. So if any of y'all can attend, we would really appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, it starts at 5:30 too.
Yes, Emily.
Okay, so we had 2 new site plans listed on the agenda for me to give a quick presentation on. The first one is the corner of FM 1103, which is this road here, and then Old Wiederstein. We currently have a final plat for this, these 3 lots, so Lot 1, Lot 2, and Lot 3. This is just for Lot 1. It's kind of hard to see on here, so I blew it up for you. So we do have that final plat application. It's a proposed 14,698 square foot retail, which you could obviously see on here that it's a proposed CVS pharmacy, proposed with a drive-through.
And you'll notice if you zoom out that typical cross-section for FM 1103 is the typical text dot that we have been planning for and talking about. So again, just, this is what we're assuming is going in and planning to go in our community.
The next one is for the corner of Elbel and 3009. So it's not actually for this first lot, but for the second lot. And we do have a replat on file for this is actually 4 lots currently, and a replat to make it into 2. Both of these are proposed retail buildings. The smaller building here is approximately 2,000 square feet, and then the larger building is approximately 7,500 square feet.
All right, thank you. Okay, there being no further items on our agenda for us to discuss tonight, Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Glombeck, we are adjourned at 7:35.